Welcome back to the Marvel Movie Minute, a daily podcast in which we explore the films of the Marvel Cinematic Universe 1 minute at a time. In this, our 5th season, we are looking at Joe Johnston's 2011 film, Captain America: The First Avenger. I'm Andy Nelson from the Next Reel Film Podcast.
I'm Pete Wright, and I was told this was the German accent episode.
Ooh, that's really well done.
That's
not bad.
Sehr gut ausgezeichnet, yes.
Exactly. Today we are talking about minute 16, which begins with suspicious whispers among the medical staff and ends with Erskine revealing he's a German. Uh-oh.
Dun, dun.
Dun,
He's
dun,
also
dun.
from Queens.
Right.
You hear some voices in there joining us on the show today. And all week we have Will Johnson and Don Shanahan from the Cinephile Hissy Fit Podcast. Welcome to the MMM world, fellas.
So excited to be here, guys. I like to look at every single minute and detail of Marvel films to the detriment of probably my dating life and everything else. So I might as well do it for on a podcast. So
Right.
Sure, why not?
You brought the right man. Therapy and all required of both of us. You brought the right man. I'm here to just piss and Cheerios, fellas. Simple as that.
Outstanding.
Perfect.
You're perfect.
We've got the perfect pair.
Yeah.
Tell us, before we jump into the minute, let's talk a little bit about the Cinephile Hissy Fit podcast. What is that show about? Why Hissy Fits? What's going on there?
So Will and I, we met as writers and editors. Well, he's an editor. I was a writer at 25 Whale. Shout out to 25 Whale. And we started to kind of interact with each other in the inter-office kind of communications that they keep there in Discord and in Slack. And our little arguments of like, you don't know what you're talking about, Don, turned into like social media and Twitter. And at some point, we kind of saw through each other's kind of guise of the like straight man and arguing person. And we're like, and the idea came up like, hey, we should make a show out of this. And 25 Well was looking to kind of expand into kind of podcast and audio and other media other than just written and online. And we've got staked and sponsored by 25 Well and the Ruminations Radio Network to kind of put our arguments on the air and on the microphone. So our show works where we both kind of have a title in mind, a movie, and there's a lover and a hater and some timed kind of diatribes and then some shared conversation. So we've been spreading it from old stuff to new releases to some deep cuts and some hot takes along the way. Had a lot of guests, had a lot of fun, and we're going on about 1.5 years strong. We're doing really good.
Yeah, 71
Absolutely.
Episodes as of this recording, which is pretty
Right.
good.
Yeah.
Fantastic.
And we've only missed 1 week, I think, and that was
Right.
a holiday or something. So we've been consistent and pushing stuff through. And as you'll discover on this podcast where we're guesting, I said to Don, let's do a podcast. And then I went to go watch Marvel movies or something. And then he came back the next day and had already got like the website and the name and designed the title and already had all the production stuff ready. He already did the intro and everything. And I just went, oh, okay, sure. And then, I just kind of show up and argue about stuff. But Don is really he kind of steers. I do the social media, which, doesn't take much.
No, but that makes you heart and soul. I mean, you are the voice of the people. I'm just a good organizer. And between the two of us, it's a good dynamic.
So which one of you is the Zola behind the Schmidt then?
Oh, right here. Yeah.
That was
You're the Zola.
a fast.
You're the mad
handrail.
mad scientist.
Yeah.
plotting
Whereas
and
he's the guy like, I don't have time for patience. And he's the non-cranker. Yeah.
No, he said when we did the podcast, he said this will change podcasts. And I said, no, this will change the world. So I don't know why I became a Colombian and that.
Yeah. I want some drugs now. Well, thank you. Yeah.
But no, it's, I should also add that we do occasionally, and that's how come maybe we got on this podcast a little bit. We do here in Phoenix. Don's in Chicago. I'm in Phoenix. So we have a little bit of a time difference, but I have been able and been lucky enough to know some great film people out here in Phoenix. And we've had 3 live shows. Unfortunately, Don hasn't been able to come out. We'll get that done eventually. But for right now, we've had about 3 live shows across the valley, and we intend to do more. So it's quite an enterprise, podcasts, social media, live shows, guest hosting stuff. It's a fun little thing.
Have you covered any or many films from the Marvel Cinematic Universe on your show?
Yeah, like Iron Man 3 was one of our first fights, like where before when we kind of organized the show, and we've covered just about every new release of it since then. I'm trying to think we've done a historical one other than Iron Man 3. Oh, the Spider-Man stuff.
We did
a little.
We did like a it's befitting our expectations that Andrew Garfield and Tobey Maguire were going to show up in No Way Home. We kind of did like a 3-part, like we did a Tobey verse, a Garfield verse, a Venom verse, and then looked at all the Holland ones and see where the leading up to No Way Home, and then we had an episode on No Way Home. I know we've done pretty much all of Phase 4. I know we did Black Widow, Eternals, Shang-Chi, Doctor Strange. I don't think we did Shang-Chi, actually, did we?
Good question.
One of my all-time favorite MCU films, by the way, because as we were talking off camera microphone, big Jackie Chan fan. That film was choreographed by a member of the Jackie Chan stunt team, especially that bus fight is pure Jackie Chan. All the way to the point of like the guy, him taking off his jacket and putting it back on mid-fight. But yeah, I don't know if we did Shang-Chi, but I know we've done pretty much every other Phase 4 release. And yeah, Iron Man 3. We did Venom, but that's not MCU, but we did Venom.
Sure.
And we did Venom before Carnage came out.
We did.
So we did not do Carnage. And I don't think we've touched Morbius.
No.
So few people have touched Morbius.
Correct.
So, yeah, there's a thing. I'm kind of known as the Marvel shill. That's kind of my...
Yes, you are.
My moniker, because I go all out to defend these things. I won't go on my soapbox today and bother you guys with it, but I'm a very... another thing that got me started with the podcast, wanting to do it was... right around the time Scorsese came out and said, Marvel wasn't cinema, I wrote probably one of the best articles I've ever written about
you did.
What art is and how Marvel fits into that. And I've been very adamant about defending art in all kinds of forms, especially because growing up, being into comics, being into metal music, being into horror films, like I've always kind of been in the subcultures that are always looked down upon. And Marvel, even though it's huge, with the elites, it's considered trash. And I always find myself defending quote unquote trash that I don't think is trash actually in the end. But that was another reason why we started the podcast too, is I wanted to get a voice out there for not the voiceless necessarily, since Marvel's the biggest franchise in the history of cinema, but to give a voice, like an alternative voice to maybe some of the elitism and gatekeeping that goes on out there. And
yeah, sure.
So that's kind of one of my functions on the show.
Don't harsh our fandom. That's the deal. I would like to say, just as a matter of color commentary, directly to Andy, do you see, man? Do you see? I'm not the only movie podcaster who forgets the movies that we've done in the past. So lay off.
Yeah, the question was, have you guys done other Marvel movies? And I go, yeah, Iron Man 3. And I was done. And Will's like, hold on here. Going through the rest of you look like a grandma in church. Like, man. Yep.
Well, and also we did, I think our 4th episode was Zack Snyder's 19-hour cut of Justice. So we did do that one.
Yeah, epic.
Obviously DC, but we did. I think that's pretty much the emphasis of our superhero dumb on the show.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right.
It'll increase. We'll get to them.
Inevitably, yeah, there's so many. It's hard to miss. You kind of throw a stone and you hit another Marvel film. There are a few. They just keep cranking these things out. In fact, I think one might have just opened at the time of recording this. So,
plug to the show early. We have a heck of an episode on Thor: Love and Thunder. If you like the dynamic we're talking about of arguing, we get it good in that one.
There's plenty to argue about with that film. I am sure.
Okay, stop it. I haven't seen it yet.
I know.
Okay. Don't tell him about the death scene.
That's right.
You just made the list, man.
I have said too much. I've gone too far. All right, let's focus our attentions here. We're looking at the little guy here. We've got Steve. He has wrapped up his 5th attempt at enlistment here, and things don't seem to be going quite as normally when he just gets a straight up rejection. there is some whispering going on here. There's a nurse who comes in and is whispering to the doctor. I should say this is the young doctor played by Doug Cockle. He's got a few lines here, and Steve seems a little nervous. And then, of course, as the doctor steps out, an enlistment office MP steps in. That's played by Ben Batt. And Steve, he's caught. This, I think, is kind of the setup that we have here. This is a moment where finally Steve feels like, all of these attempts might have caught up with him. Thoughts about the way that this scene is set up? Who'd like to say something about this?
I really appreciate the just the easy cuts and nothing super rapid, but like you noticed and talked about, the switch of personnel, nice and sly. Whisper's an easy thing. Nothing like, oh my gosh, it's not big barge in the room kinds of stuff. The increased security and nerves, the 4 layers of Chris playing this part. If you remember how the shrinking works, it's like 4 different ways they have to shoot this movie to make what you have there. The 4 different ways Chris and the body double plays the increased security and a little bit of nerves, and even the production department with the cute signage of, just, by the way, illegal papers will get you in trouble. And then he moves to a place where there's another sign behind him of all the symptoms you can't have to be in the military, which will come into play with the idea of what he is. But I like that oh crap moment from Steve where, he does have that silently, because not a line out of Chris, but like put the shoes on, try to get himself together, but play it cool if I can when people walk in the room. And it just shows his I guess it shows his toughness. Like he'll take the blame if he has to, but at the same time, if I can get away, I'm going to get away. No cowardice, but just like, I got to preserve my chance to try again.
The thing about looking at things minute by minute is you kind of are forced to look at the whole and then see how it plays out in that minute. And there's a couple of things on a technical side and a character side that I like about this 1 minute scene. One, from the character side, is that, Captain America is always kind of portrayed as a Boy Scout, like a rule follower. But as his arc would progress in future movies and in this one, I like that, he will bend rules to do the right thing. And this scene emphasizes that because he is breaking the law, which is something you don't think of Captain America doing by forging things, but it's for a good purpose. And that's more of what runs him than his quote unquote by the book rule making, is his ability to judge when it is okay to take that step that might bend a rule. But on the technical side, I remember, and this still really holds up really well. I remember when I first saw this movie, when they reveal Captain America, Steve Rogers after the serum, I was so convinced of Tiny Steve that I thought the fake, I thought Chris Evans with the real body was the fake for a minute, because it's almost unrealistic how buff he is, and this scene kind of emphasizes the fact that you're not focused. And this is a movie that Marvel movies and a lot of movies that have visual effects have a problem with, is sometimes you focus too much on the visual effects, but we're so invested in Steve at this point that I'm not sitting there going like, oh, wow, I wonder how they filmed that. Or there's these 4 stages of filming. Like, I'm invested in the character. I believe the character. I believe what's being presented to me, that he is literally this 90-pound weakling. I never think about the visual effects really. I'm engaged in the story. And that goes for the maximum view of the movie, but also in the scene specifically.
Well, in this scene, too, in particular, because it's so antiqued, right? It's that sort of jaundiced, light and the hospital light that it really obscures even more of the masking that you would otherwise be looking for in the harsh light of principal photography and the rest of the series. I think it's just beautiful. To your point, it's fantastic. I love that you bring up this idea about Steve breaking the law, and it always strikes me that Steve's balance is a balance between doing individual good and greater good. And his efforts here, you could make the case that ultimately Erskine discovers him as a tool for the greater good, but everything leading up to this point is individual good. He's satisfying his own inner sense of patriotism and ego and wanting to do the right thing, feeling like he's going to stand for the greater good, but ultimately people like Steve are escorted out of the military because they are counter to the greater good. They generally put more people at risk if they have to be rescued, if they have to whatever. That is an exercise of ego for him to want to defy that. And I love this transition that Erskine discovers. Here's a kid who has what it takes to test something that might be useful for the greater good. I think this is this set of minutes is a beautiful exercise to that end.
It's a good point about the ego element of it because, I mean, yeah, there is this side to Steve where, I mean, as has been pointed out in the film, he could do like Timmy and just collect scrap metal, right? I mean, he could just
nice work, Timmy.
He could be doing his part over here on the state side, but he really it isn't about helping however he can. He very specifically wants to go overseas and fight Nazis, and there is a little bit of an ego thing, but it is about like he sees this bigger picture of like, I can do more. He believes in himself. And I mean, yes, there is that ego element, but it really is about this little guy who is more than the sum of his parts. Like when you look at that list that was on his form, the asthma and everything else, and a lot of these things are on the list behind him, he completely doesn't fit what the army is looking for. But it's that mental side of him, and that's what I think is interesting. And we'll certainly talk about that in the next minute. But in this minute, it's a great setup for what's to come of this kid who, as Erskine says, so you want to go overseas, you want to kill Nazis. You know, he just wanted to do a little more.
German accent again.
There will be accents.
The other thing I tip my hat to is maybe this is the millennial term, but I don't see it as much. I totally get what you guys are saying with ego, but I think it's just a basic level of like FOMO, just fear of missing out. You know, he wants to be part of that cause. He sees his best friend go across for that cause. I want to be there too, do my part, you know, and you're right. He could collect scrap metal, but the greater FOMO is, serving and having that pride to do so. So I see it more. I get that the ego angle is there, but for me, I soften it down to FOMO more than ego.
I'll buy that. I'll buy that. I think isn't FOMO an exercise in ego?
Totally. Yeah, definitely, for sure. But like, not like, I need to be a soldier. It's not the largest.
No. And
it's on the
think
scale.
It's more archetypically, like it is a motivator, and that's kind of where I'm going. Like, what is motivating? It's coming from his own sort of internal need to serve his internal needs. And I don't necessarily see that as an exercise of bravado at all. That's never anything I get from Steve at any size.
It's funny. It's funny too. There's a little undercurrent going on. I was just thinking about this because I recently watched this and Winter Soldier, showing my dad, and he ended up liking them, and he doesn't like Marvel stuff. But another undercurrent about this is, World War II kind of has this necessary evil quality to it. Like this is something that must be done because this evil must be stopped. The evil can be defined a little bit more. Sure. And one thing I think that they examine more in the sequels, we don't talk a lot about propaganda. I never get the feeling that he's been manipulated. He's got a good heart, like he's doing, but he is reading into the idea that like you must serve and must do, what's right. And what I like about that is, he sees this as a necessary evil or fight. And then when you get to Winter Soldier, where, they're trying to do the project that will eliminate targets before the crimes are committed, kind of like a little Minority Report kind of thing. He's not buying that propaganda, won't play with that. And so I'm anxious to see, Marvel, like trying to get the 4 quadrants isn't going to go too deep into the effects of propaganda and things like that. This is more of a feel-good hero story, but I do find that an interesting aspect that the comics have had to deal with too, because there was a time when once Captain America was dead for a while, they brought him back to fight communists, and that quite didn't catch on with the populace because it wasn't exactly like a quote unquote necessary evil, and then they bring him back. It's something that what the character represents. I've seen a lot of like, not to dip into politics, but I'll see a lot of
Cannonball in the pool. Here he goes.
Let's see. let's see people that leaned a certain direction.
Which one will?
Let's just say they lean either left or right. I'll let you guess. But they'll use Captain America as a propaganda symbol of like Americanism.
They sure will.
And then forget what he actually stands for. So I find the whole idea of that, what you're talking about, maybe the FOMO, the wanting to do the right thing, the ego, the, choosing, like what I said about, breaking the law when it's necessary evils. I find that a very interesting drama at play, especially with a symbol like Captain America, what he represents to different people.
Well, and I think that's an excellent tip because, what we have here is the little guy driven by his need to participate, right? And then what happens when you give the little guy strength, and with that strength comes agency, and with agency comes Winter Soldier, right? Like that to me is an exercise of now I have power and authority to actually make decisions that about the policies of the people that I normally serve. And I think that's a fantastic arc. And this is the movie about the first part.
Yeah, and we're at the very beginning of that whole part. So we're just kind of dipping our toes into the water of all this. So I have a question for all of you. We came into this, we saw that Erskine, for whatever reason, is hanging out at the enlistment center here at the expo, and he overhears Steve and Bucky having this conversation about why Steve wants to serve and all of this sort of stuff. And what do you think of the way is Erskine just kind of like, is this whole thing a test? Is he just playing with him to have him go through the actual process of actually, going, seeing a doctor and all this, as opposed to just kind of talking to him from the beginning? Like, why does he go through this to actually like have Steve go sit with the doctor, do the physical, and then have the doctor and the nurse leave, have an MP come in all before he comes in? Is he just toying with him, or is this also part of his test?
I buy it too as a test. Yeah,
definitely. Okay. I would say so because, a couple of things. He has his files ready to go. So I do think that, Erskine saw these patterns and maybe he didn't know who Steve was and just happened to cross him at the fair or whatever. But, he had the file ready that said like, oh, you tried 5 times to do this. I mean, I'm sure you can't just find that. There's probably literally 1 million people trying to enlist. So I think he had some knowledge of who Steve was, but also...
You mean before he even showed up here, he already was kind of like tracking this guy?
Well, because, like I said, just logically, it seems like he would because he had the file ready. Okay. I just have the idea that there's so many people enlisting. Like, sure, they're just going to have that file at the fair. Like he was aware of that, and just maybe if he happened to bump into him, that's one thing, or if he's been tracking him, that's another. They leave that up in the air. It's not totally important, but it is definitely a test of reactions. Like, how far is he willing to go? Is he willing to play this until he gets caught? Because he's tried it 5 times and hasn't been caught. And is he willing to do it a 6th time? What's his reaction when he sees an MP, or what's his? There's
sure
all kinds of decision making in this 1 minute that he has to make. Does he cut and run? Does he fight and run? Does he sit there and make up excuses? He tries at first. He's like, oh, it's the wrong file, guys. But then he realizes where he is, and we'll find out the next minute. He might as well state his case of what he stands for.
It's an interesting. I hadn't thought of that he had kind of been tracking Steve. So that's an interesting way to kind of view that. I guess I was thinking that maybe he was interested in this guy, got his name, and then like had the exam drag on so that he could collect his file. But it is a lot of stuff to track, especially considering that theoretically they wouldn't have known that this is a person who's tried 4 times before. So it certainly is an interesting way of viewing that.
It is the only way of viewing it that addresses my criticism of why Erskine was sitting at the World's Fair in the first place. Right. Like, it's so dumb that he's sitting in this like rando recruitment office. The top scientist for the military is sitting in this rando recruitment office. If he's not tracking Steve, why would he have all of the files? No computers, kids. Like, they weren't tracking. It was paper recruitment files. Why would he have all those files on him if he wasn't tracking him?
Also, keep in mind, Stark is there, and Stark is kind of at that point, what would be a private contractor of what would become S.H.I.E.L.D. So it's kind of and he's there. Maybe they're working on it. I would assume that for the super soldier serum project, they've got to have backups or other ideas. And maybe Stark's working with them on that. Maybe he's checking out other stuff. Maybe there's other that test of strength, but I don't know. There's ways to read into it, but I think in the end it was, he'd been tracking him, maybe not knowing exactly what he looked like, but tracking him based on the paperwork. And because he implies later, because he does seem rather adamant about Steve. If that was the first time he had heard of him, because there's a scene much later with Tommy Lee Jones where he's like, "Why are you sticking with this guy?" I mean, I know a lot of people write him off immediately when they look at him, but he seems very adamant. And I would feel like a scientist would, have the hypothesis going and keep that in mind at all times, I guess. I don't know. I do get a sense that he tracked him.
Well, and we'll be able to talk about that a little bit more tomorrow, because to your point, he'll say something about why he was drawn to Steve's file, and so that will definitely be interesting.
I think what softens and helps all this out is this is Tucci's chance to introduce himself, and it's such a disarming, charming way of just doing the "Hey, where are you from?" commonalities, because it's not to say that people don't do that anymore, but that's a 1940s thing to do. Like my grandpa, ask everybody. Like we would go on vacations and he would go to like rest areas and stuff like that where you just normally just try to get in, pee, get your brochures and get out. My grandpa, the dairy farmer from Iowa or from Illinois, is like, he asks complete strangers all the time, "Hey, where are you from?" Like just
sure.
He'll get into that yarn where that's just what those people from that era do. So for that to kind of do the whole Queen's introduction, Germany name dropping thing, it's just a disarming thing, and to have that kind of spin from that first test question of, "Oh, so you want to kill Nazis?" And Steve's answer is "Excuse me," which is, I think, telling to where his character already is going. But at the same time, the disarming introduction from Erskine helps that oh crap moment go away for Steve, I guess.
Well, and you're right. He's so kind. Like, that's something that I love about the way Stanley Tucci plays this character, is there's just this kindness that he exudes about the way that he just introduces himself. Even it's just saying his name. "I represent the Strategic Scientific Reserve," which we'll talk about here in a sec. And the way he approaches, like when Steve says, "Where are you from?" and the whole thing with Queens and everything. I don't know. He just sounds like a nice guy, and he very much puts the audience and Steve kind of takes them off their guard. Like, you don't have to worry anymore. Like we're in a safer space now, and I really love the way that he kind of brings that in.
And it also, there's minor callbacks, but emphasizing where he's from, the pride of where he's from. They play with that later in Civil War when he's like, "You got heart, kid. Where are you from?" And Spider-Man's like, "Queens," and he's like, "I have Brooklyn." Like I like that there's that part of that character that because a lot of these people you don't like. I mean, maybe there is an explanation. I'm just forgetting off the top of my head, but I don't know where Tony Stark was born. I don't know where I don't know where Bruce Banner was born. New York is definitely a part of his identity, and those boroughs are very important. I like that. I like that part.
Good call.
Absolutely. Before we get into kind of the Strategic Scientific Reserve and the address or the cross streets in Queens, I just wanted to run through a few things on the poster behind. I did find it interesting. I was doing some research into kind of like what the Army and the Navy and everything like would look at as far as the standards of their different services. And, I didn't realize this, but the Army actually had no restrictions for color blindness. You could be colorblind in the Army, but you couldn't in the Navy.
Right.
They also had different height differences. Like for the Army, you had to be between 60 and 78 inches. The Navy was like 62 and 76 inches, or that was the minimums and maximums. And so they had all these differences, but there were a lot of commonalities. And I do think it's interesting looking at the list behind them. And I suppose it just says you must inform the medical officer if you have any of the following. And I suppose it's like, if you are colorblind, well, you can go into the Army, but you can't go into the Navy, etc. But the one that caught my eye, I mean, there's a bunch of things on here like diphtheria, epilepsy, glaucoma, heart disease, some of the things I understand. But then there's also chronic rash or pimples. If you're having pimples, we need to discuss this because it may affect your entry into the military.
Pimples don't
Did
serve.
any of you?
Pimples don't serve, sir.
No, yeah.
It's a
boil on your pride of America. Yeah.
No, that's a sign of a dominant force, that has the ability to make as much perfect soldiers as possible. I guarantee you, in the latter stages of the war in Japan, they're not going to be, saying like, you got pimples, we can't go. They're going to take any able-bodied person they can. So I think we're at a point where, it's what year is the
42, right?
We're in 43 right now.
43. Okay.
Flag Day. Yeah.
Yeah. So, America is making headway in European theater. Japan was kicking our butts for about a year, in the Pacific, but we were starting to turn that around. So I would say that this is the marshaling of a dominant force. You got strong allies at this point. You could be selective on on who's in your army, but I'm sure it would be a little bit different if things were a lot more dire.
Well, again, obviously, I mean, eventually they'll get to a point where they are just saying, "Hey, you random person, you're now serving."
Mm-hmm.
Like they weren't even checking. I mean, eventually they probably would tell some people, "Sorry, you can't actually serve." But there was a point where they had to start becoming much less restrictive in who was going to actually get to serve. So it is interesting to kind of see this, though.
Cinema has a lot of interesting scenes of like the people in control of that. I always think of two movies in particular. I think of It's a Wonderful Life, where Mr. Potter is an evil guy, and he's just like, I'm sending George Bailey to the war, even though he's a 47-year-old high school student. And then I think of Pearl Harbor, which is the one where they talk about colorblindness, or he's unable to read. I think Ben Affleck can't read, or he's got bad vision. And as long as you just get a hot nurse to kind of give you a hint at what the letters are, you can fly a plane. So I like there's a more realistic approach to, and perhaps historically accurate approach in this film to reprocess.
I always go back to Tom Hanks in A League of Their Own, who's a bitter person because he wasn't able to serve or had to leave because he, had done something to his leg. And he's like, you don't need your leg to fight Nazis. You just need your trigger finger. It's like that whole thing. It's like, I mean, this was definitely the era of that. And it speaks to, again, going back to Steve and his need to serve, need to kind of help be a part of that. But it's all kind of part of that mentality of the time.
It is. It's a fascinating one that I've always loved digging into history with, especially in terms of Hollywood, too, like movies, because, one of the most controversial ones is someone who would not fight in the war, which was John Wayne, who eventually became like this symbol of manliness and jingoism and American heroism. But he was like considered, especially by John Ford, like a coward for not wanting to, like you talk to a lot of people, it's almost, like I said, that necessary evil part. There's a lot of parts, where if someone chooses not to do it now, it's like, good for you. But back then it was like, you had to do it. It really, and I think what many modern audiences might not understand too, is that you could be drafted. So for you to enlist when there's a draft, I mean, you're basically saying like, I'm not even going to take chance that I get in. I'm going to do this.
Mm-hmm.
And that is another step of, I don't know if you want to call it heroism, but like you're choosing to do this.
Yeah.
Most people did not choose to do this.
Right.
So that's another step in the level of perhaps selflessness or heroism, and that he's trying to get in. And there's some kids later or earlier that were forced to be in.
And it definitely shifts over time, World War II versus now, I suppose. Like if you're going to get enlisted in the army, it's like, what is the mentality of somebody enlisting in the army now? Is it just kind of like that jingoism? I just want to be, a soldier. I want guns. Or is it like, I just need to get into college and I need a scholarship sort of thing?
There's a lot of dark aspects of that because, as we discovered, especially during, the Bush years, a lot of it is targeted recruitment, going for disadvantaged youth, minorities, ones that unfortunately don't have a lot of options or outlets just because of the way the system works. So they're just like, hey, cannon fodder, So there is a lot of darkness to why a lot of people. Of course, there's honor and respect for military people. Don't get me wrong, but there's also a lot of interesting social dynamics at play for how they recruit armies now, as opposed to then. Like I said, back then, they had no idea if, we were all going to be speaking German or Japanese or Italian. It was a legitimate threat. I always think of the Norm Macdonald joke where he says, like, Germany decided to fight the world, and they almost won. It's kind of funny because they were. I mean, for such a small country, they were such a powerful force. You had no idea what was going to happen. So
yeah. Well, so let's shift gears a little bit. Let's talk about this Strategic Scientific Reserve. This is where Dr. Erskine says he works. He represents the Strategic Scientific Reserve. What is your understanding of this? At
this moment in the movie?
Well, no, just like, Will, you've read comics, or Don, I don't know if you've read any of the comics too, but did you already have a sense, like when he says Strategic Scientific Reserve, was that like the little flag going off that got you all excited when you heard that in the movie? Like I know a lot of people did in Iron Man when Coulson brings up S.H.I.E.L.D.
Yeah.
Was this one of those moments?
No, it was gobbledygook for me. Like, oh, SSR, cool, let's go.
Yeah, it's as befitting the MCU, and the reason why it's so successful, which shocks me, is because a lot of the characters they use in the comics were considered B or C level. So I didn't read a lot of Captain America, I didn't read a lot of Iron Man. A lot of these characters that have become the figureheads of the franchise, were not exactly like top tier. All the top tier stuff that everyone read, Fantastic Four, Spider-Man, X-Men, those were all sold off to other companies. So I did not have a super well-versed history of Captain America. So nothing, I didn't. I was just like, oh, okay, sure, he's going to the thing where he gets the thing. That's all I was thinking. So,
well, Pete, what did you think when he said that? Did it trigger anything for you, or did it make you think, oh, this must be early S.H.I.E.L.D.?
Yeah, probably. But over the course of talking about these movies for so many years now, I feel like I've been reprogrammed, and my entire memory of this movie has been retconned by what I've learned since. I don't think I had any sense that SSR would become would have become S.H.I.E.L.D. at the time. I think I was plausibly ignorant. I didn't know what it was, but just the fact that strategic is in it, I suppose my brain probably said, oh, this must be like the early version of S.H.I.E.L.D. It sounds like one of those sort of acronyms that they would say. If only because Coulson said it so many times in Iron Man. Like that feels like connective tissue. Right, exactly. I guess SSR was a top-secret Allied war agency. It formed in 1940 by Franklin Delano Roosevelt, the president, to battle Hydra, the Nazi Special Weapons Division, and eventually it would battle with the Soviet division Leviathan and the Council of Nine, and eventually would actually become a part of S.H.I.E.L.D. I've just learned all that as I've kind of done research, but it is interesting where it does feel like one of those S.H.I.E.L.D. sorts of things. And I suppose this is this mysterious person who's hanging around in the recruitment centers. It just seems like he's probably some representative of some secret government organization, and it fits. It just fits, right?
Mm-hmm. Yep.
That's where we are. All right. And then he tells Steve, I love the line, Steve asks him where he's from specifically because kind of he has this accent, right? And he's like curious. I mean, this is the time, we're battling the Germans. You sound a little German. And I love the way that this plays off where he asks him, where are you from? And he says, Queens, 73rd Street and Utopia Parkway. I know a few of you did some digging on that cross streets. Pete, what did you find out about 73rd Street and Utopia Parkway?
Sadly, there's no 73rd Street and Utopia Parkway. It is 73rd Avenue that does appear to exist in Queens.
Blow it up. Cinema sins. Thanks a lot, Marvel.
Very much feels like they've done. But I'll tell you what, like at the northeast corner of 73rd Avenue and Utopia Parkway is a paved playground, couple of basketball courts, looks like a stickball court in there. The other three corners are all like, connected homes, walk-ups. Like it feels very much like he could have been from here. Like this was the corner they were looking at when they changed it from avenue to street. You know what I'm saying? Like it really does. It doesn't feel like, oh, now it's just like there's a Starbucks on the corner. It feels very much like a home.
I just looked at it on Google Maps. There's a TJ Maxx, which you could probably find a shirt from this movie somewhere.
That's right.
It's like, somewhere in the stacks of clothes at the TJ Maxx.
Mm-hmm. There's some weird meta something going on there.
Yeah, right.
A meta shopping trip to the corner of 73rd Avenue and Utopia Parkway.
Yeah.
Oh, man. Okay. Interesting. Well, it is one of those things. There's been a lot of that with this, of putting in those, avenue versus street, or kind of those little shifts. So sure. It's really no surprise that they would do something like that. But great little moment. I that's kind of the end of the minute. We have this moment revealing that he is from Germany, and that's it. Any other thoughts about what's going on this minute from any of you?
For me, it's I did read about casting where Tucci really took this movie on because he wanted to do a German accent. He had never done a German accent. And that was kind of one of the selling points of this movie for him. He was coming out of like Lovely Bones, doing small scale stuff, and like Devil Wears Prada, where this was a nice bump for him to do something fun. And I think it's kind of, in this movie especially, kind of starts that I feel like the trend for Marvel increased starting from here on of hiring really good supporting actors for small parts, just to kind of bolster that poster, poster, I should say, and just kind of that depth of the movie, because you could get anybody to play this part, to kind of be the scientist that gets killed off in 30 minutes. But the fact that it's Tucci, who is, as I said before, a super disarming guy, but yet at the same time he has that twinkle in his eye where if he had to be an evil person for the 2 seconds that Steve wonders he's evil, he could pull it off too. But yeah, Tucci being very ethnically ambiguous as a European American is kind of fun. That he took the part to do German. I'm like, oh, I never would have thought of that.
I also think, as a minor student of World War II history, I think it casts Steve in a very good light, because more so with the Japanese, but also with Italians and Germans, there was a lot of the alien, the other, that you could group everyone together. So if there's German, he must be bad. And I like that. Yeah. Steve is just like, I don't have any problems with that you're German, kind of feeds into his ethos that he's a little bit above, falling for the company line or the propaganda that the other is automatically an enemy. So, I mean, like I said, we're maximizing one little minute, but I think you can read into the character a little bit.
Yeah. His same thing, his body language. Like I said, either the body double or Chris sitting there, his like, do you have a problem with that? And his little, just the way he rolls his shoulders ever so slightly, just in a, he wasn't a still like, no, or it wasn't like a, no. It was just, right. I just love the body language. Small little tick, but worth it.
Very mild little shrug. So he shrugs it off. Yeah, it's great. Pete, any last thoughts from you?
Oh, I'm ready. Let's do it. I want to see the next minute.
Next minute. Yeah. Boom.
Yeah. All right. Yeah. Next minute's going to be a good one. All right. Well, that's it for today's episode, everybody. Once again, Don and Will, thanks so much for joining us. Remind everybody again where they can find your podcast and more about you.
You can look us up at Cinephile Hissy Fit. You'll find that on Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook. And of course, Apple, Spotify, anywhere you find your favorite shows. Also give a little love to the 25 Well, who sponsors us as a post, and also the Ruminations Radio Network, where we are part of a very good network of very, very good podcasts and shows.
That is fantastic.
Thanks, guys.
Well, check that out, everybody. They've got a lot of great stuff to listen to and to read and to dig into. And we'll be back tomorrow with another minute of this show. We'll be looking at minute 17. So for now, until next time, true believers.
Marvel Movie Minute is a production of True Story FM. Engineering by Andy Nelson. This season's music is Spread the News by Anthony Vega, and this season's show art is by Winston Yabo. Find the show at truestory.fm, and if your podcast app allows ratings and reviews, consider doing that for this show.